I never imagined that a Tuesday morning at Lincoln Elementary would change my entire life. My name is Jessica Parker. I'm 29 years old, and I've been teaching second grade for the past 5 years here in Chicago. Every day follows the same routine. Wake up at 6, get my daughter Chloe ready for school, drop her off at first grade, then walk down the hallway to my own classroom. It's exhausting being both mother and teacher, but it's the life I've built for us after the divorce. That particular morning started like any other. Chloe was excited because the school was hosting a family day event in the afternoon, where parents could come watch their children perform in a small play. I had rehearsed with my students for weeks, and Chloe's class was also participating. She kept asking if her daddy would come, and each time my heart broke a little more. Brian hadn't shown up for a single school event in the 2 years since our divorce. I'd learned to expect his absence, but Chloe still held on to hope. The gymnasium was decorated with colorful banners and balloons by noon. Parents started arriving early, filling the folding chairs we'd set up in rows. I stood near the stage, checking my clipboard and making sure all the children were ready backstage. My students were nervous and excited, their little faces painted with determination. I spotted Chloe peeking from behind the curtain, her eyes scanning the crowd for a face that wouldn't be there. That's when I first saw him. Dominic Ricci walked into the gymnasium like he owned the place, which, given what I would later learn, wasn't far from the truth. He was tall, probably 6'3", with dark hair styled perfectly, and a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. But it wasn't his clothes or his height that caught my attention. It was the way he moved, with a quiet confidence that seemed to command respect from everyone around him without him saying a single word. He sat in the back row, and I noticed several of the other teachers whispering and glancing his way. Emma Rodriguez, who teaches 3rd grade, leaned over to me and whispered, "That's Marco Benedetti's uncle. You know, the quiet boy in Mrs. Thompson's class? I heard he's some kind of businessman. Very wealthy. He comes to pick up Marco sometimes." I nodded absently, too focused on making sure the performance went smoothly to pay much attention. The play began, and my students did wonderfully. Chloe's class performed second, and she sang her little heart out, though I could see the disappointment in her eyes when she looked into the crowd and didn't find Brian. After the performances, we had a small reception with cookies and punch in the cafeteria. I was helping serve refreshments when I felt someone's presence beside me. I turned and found myself looking directly into the most intense brown eyes I'd ever seen. Dominic Ricci stood there, holding a cup of punch, a slight smile on his face. "You must be Miss Parker," he said, his voice deep and smooth, with just a hint of an accent that suggested Italian heritage. "Marco talks about you often. He's in the after-school tutoring program you run." I blinked, surprised. "Oh, yes, Marco. He's a sweet boy, very bright. And you're his uncle?" "Something like that," he replied, and there was something in his tone that suggested the relationship was more complicated than that simple label. "I wanted to thank you for the extra attention you give him. His home situation is complicated." Before I could respond, Chloe appeared at my side, tugging on my sleeve. "Mommy, can I have another cookie?" She looked up at Dominic with curious eyes, not shy at all, which was unusual for her around strangers. "Just one more, sweetheart," I said, then looked back at Dominic. "This is my daughter, Chloe." "Hello, Chloe," Dominic said, and to my surprise, he crouched down to her level, something most adults never bothered to do. "You were wonderful in the play. You have a beautiful singing voice." Chloe beamed at the compliment, and I felt a flutter in my chest at the genuine warmth in his expression. "Thank you. Did you like the part where we danced?" "That was my favorite part," he assured her, then glanced up at me. "You did an excellent job teaching them. It's clear you care about your students." I felt heat rise to my cheeks. Compliments about my teaching always meant more to me than anything else. "Thank you, Mr. Ricci. That means a lot," Please call me Dominic." He stood up, and I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. "And I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I noticed your daughter looking for someone in the crowd during the performance. Her father?" The directness of his question caught me off guard, and I felt defensive walls immediately go up. "That's really not any of your business, Mr. Ricci." "Dominic," he corrected gently, not seeming offended at all by my sharp tone. "And you're right, it's not. I apologize for overstepping. It's just that I know what it's like to grow up wishing for a parent who isn't there." Something in his eyes told me he wasn't just making conversation, that he truly understood. Before I could respond, the principal, Mrs. Henderson, appeared and started making announcements about upcoming school events. Dominic excused himself politely and returned to Marco, who was waiting near the exit. I watched him leave, feeling strangely unsettled by the encounter. There was something about him that was both attractive and intimidating, a combination I'd never experienced before. Emma sidled up to me, grinning knowingly. "He was totally into you," she said, bumping my shoulder playfully. "Don't be ridiculous," I replied, but I couldn't stop the smile that tugged at my lips. "He was just being polite." "Jessica, that man looked at you like you were the only person in the room. Trust me, I know these things." I rolled my eyes and changed the subject, but throughout the rest of the afternoon, I couldn't get Dominic Ricci out of my mind. There was something magnetic about him, something that both drew me in and made me want to run in the opposite direction. I'd learned the hard way with Brian that charming men could hide dangerous secrets. That evening, after putting Chloe to bed, I sat at my kitchen table grading papers and thinking about the day. Chloe had talked nonstop about the nice man who said she sang pretty, and I'd had to gently remind her not to talk to strangers. But was Dominic really a stranger if he was connected to one of my students? I pushed the thoughts away and focused on my work, telling myself I was being ridiculous. Men like Dominic Ricci didn't pursue single mothers who taught elementary school and lived in modest apartments. He probably had a girlfriend or wife somewhere, someone sophisticated and worldly who matched his expensive suits and confident demeanor. But as I climbed into bed that night, I couldn't shake the memory of how gentle he'd been with Chloe, how his eyes had softened when he looked at her. And despite all my logical reasons for staying away from men, especially mysterious wealthy men with intense gazes, I found myself hoping I'd see him again. The universe, it seemed, had plans to make that hope a reality much sooner than I expected. The next morning, as I was walking Chloe to her classroom, I saw Dominic in the hallway. He was talking to Marco's teacher, Mrs. Thompson, his hand resting protectively on the boy's shoulder. When he saw me, he smiled, and I felt that flutter in my chest again. "Good morning, Miss Parker," he called out, and several teachers turned to look at us. "Good morning, Mr. Ricci," I replied, trying to sound professional even as Chloe waved enthusiastically at him. He walked over to us, Marco trailing behind him. "I wanted to ask if you might have time to discuss Marco's tutoring schedule. I know you usually meet with parents after school, but my schedule today is complicated." It was a reasonable request, and I couldn't think of a good reason to refuse. "Of course. I have a free period at 10. We could talk in my classroom then?" "Perfect. I'll see you then." He smiled again, and I noticed a small dimple in his left cheek that I hadn't seen yesterday. Then he was gone, walking Marco to his classroom with that same confident stride. Emma appeared at my elbow immediately. "He just made an appointment to see you alone in your classroom," she said, her voice sing-song. "Still think he's just being polite?" I ignored her teasing and took Chloe to her room, but my mind was already racing ahead to 10 o'clock. I told myself it was just a parent conference, nothing more, nothing less. But deep down, I knew something had shifted yesterday in that gymnasium. Dominic Ricci had walked into my carefully constructed life, and nothing was going to be the same again. At precisely 10 o'clock, there was a knock on my classroom door. I'd spent the previous hour trying to focus on my lesson plans while my students were at music class, but my mind kept wandering to the upcoming meeting. I stood up, smoothed down my simple navy dress, and opened the door. Dominic stood there, somehow looking even more imposing in the fluorescent lighting of the school hallway. He'd removed his suit jacket, and his white shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, revealing strong forearms. He held a coffee cup from the expensive cafe downtown in each hand. "I hope you don't mind," he said, offering me one. "I noticed you didn't get to drink your coffee at the reception yesterday because you were too busy taking care of everyone else. Caramel latte, right?" I asked Mrs. Rodriguez. I took the cup, surprised and touched by the gesture. "Thank you. That's very observant. And yes, Emma would know my order. Please come in." He entered my classroom, and I was suddenly aware of how small the space felt with him in it. He looked around at the colorful bulletin boards, the reading corner with its beanbags and bookshelves, the student artwork covering the walls. A genuine smile crossed his face. "This is wonderful," he said softly. "You've created a real sanctuary here. I can see why the children love your class." "Thank you," I said, gesturing to one of the adult-sized chairs I kept for parent conferences. "Please sit." "So, you wanted to discuss Marco's tutoring?" Dominic sat down, and I took the chair across from him, placing a small table between us. He took a sip of his coffee, and I noticed he seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "Marco is a good kid," he began, "but he's been through a lot. His mother, my sister, passed away 3 years ago. His father is not in the picture. I've been his guardian since then, but I travel frequently for business, so he stays with my mother most of the time." "I'm so sorry," I said sincerely. "I didn't know about his mother. He never mentioned it. He doesn't talk about it much, but your after-school program has been good for him. He's more confident, his grades have improved. I wanted to thank you personally and ask if there's anything more I can do to support his education." We spent the next 20 minutes discussing Marco's progress, and I found myself relaxing in Dominic's presence. He asked intelligent questions about teaching methods and truly seemed invested in his nephew's well-being. But there was something else beneath the surface of our conversation, an undercurrent of awareness that had nothing to do with tutoring or education. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said suddenly, after we'd exhausted the topic of Marco's schoolwork. I tensed slightly. "I suppose." "Yesterday, when I mentioned your daughter's father, you got defensive. I apologize again for that. But I've been thinking about it, and I want you to know that if he's causing problems for you or Chloe, I might be able to help." I stared at him, confused and a bit alarmed. "Help how? And why would you want to help us? You don't even know us." Dominic leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression serious. "Let's just say I have resources and connections. And as for why, isn't it enough that I can see a woman struggling to protect her daughter from someone who should be protecting her instead?" My breath caught. How did he know Brian was a threat? I hadn't told anyone at school about the increasingly aggressive texts Brian had been sending, demanding to see Chloe, threatening to take her from me. I'd been handling it alone, like I handled everything. But the fear was always there, lurking beneath the surface. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, but my voice wavered. Dominic reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times, then turned it to face me. On the screen was a photograph of Brian, stumbling out of a bar, clearly intoxicated. The timestamp showed it was from 2 nights ago. "Your ex-husband, Brian Parker, has a DUI on his record from last year," Dominic said quietly. "He was fired from his job 3 months ago. He's currently living with his girlfriend in a studio apartment, and he's been texting you threatening messages about custody. Am I wrong?" I felt cold all over. "How do you know all of that? Have you been investigating me?" "Not you. Him. After I saw Chloe's face yesterday, I had someone look into her father. I wanted to know what kind of man would miss his daughter's school performance. His eyes met mine, and there was steel in them now. I don't like what I found. I should have been angry. I should have told him he had no right to invade my privacy or Brian's. But instead, I felt a wave of relief so powerful it made me dizzy. Someone knew. Someone had seen what I'd been dealing with alone, and they were offering help. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing," he said simply. "I want to help because I can, and because I think you and Chloe deserve better than to live in fear. I'm not sleeping with you in exchange for protection, if that's what you're implying," I said sharply, my defenses going back up. To my surprise, Dominic laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. "Jessica, I'm not offering a transaction. I'm offering friendship and assistance. Though I won't lie and say I'm not attracted to you, I am. Very much so. But that's separate from this." The honesty of his statement took the wind out of my defensive sails. I sat back in my chair, studying him. "Who are you, really? You're not just a wealthy businessman, are you?" "That's a complicated question," he replied carefully. "My family has been in Chicago for generations. We have business interests in various sectors. Some of them are legitimate, some of them exist in gray areas. But I promise you this, I would never do anything to put you or Chloe in danger. My interest in helping you is genuine." I understood what he wasn't saying. I wasn't naive. I'd lived in Chicago my whole life, and I knew there were families, organizations that operated outside the law. The Ricci name, now that I thought about it, was familiar from news reports over the years. I should have run from this man and his offer of help. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to thank him politely and end this conversation. But then, I thought about Brian's last text message, sent at 2 a.m. 3 days ago. "I'm coming for her, Jess. You can't keep my daughter from me forever. I'll prove I'm a good father. And then you'll see. The courts will give her to me." I thought about the fear I'd been living with, the nights I couldn't sleep because I was afraid Brian would show up drunk at our door. I thought about Chloe's sad eyes yesterday, looking for a father who didn't care enough to show up. "Okay," I heard myself say, "but I need to understand what I'm agreeing to. What does your help look like?" Dominic's expression softened. "For now, it means I'll make sure Brian knows he's being watched, that if he tries anything, there will be consequences. It means you have someone to call if he shows up and causes problems. And it means Chloe has someone who will show up at her school events, if you'll allow it." That last part broke through my remaining resistance. "You'd do that? Come to school events?" "I'd be honored to," he said quietly. "Marco's events and Chloe's, if you'll let me." I felt tears prickling at my eyes and blinked them away quickly. "Why? I still don't understand why you care so much about people you barely know." Dominic was quiet for a moment, looking down at his coffee cup. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with old pain. "My father was a hard man. He was there physically, but never emotionally. He taught me the family business, but he never taught me how to be a good person. My mother tried to make up for it, but she couldn't fill both roles. I grew up wishing for a father who would show up to school events, who would protect me, who would care about more than just the business." He looked up at me, and I saw vulnerability in his eyes that hadn't been there before. When I saw Chloe yesterday, looking for her father in that crowd, I saw myself. And when I talked to you, I saw a woman fighting alone to give her child the life she deserves. I have the power to change that. Why wouldn't I? In that moment, sitting in my classroom with morning sunlight streaming through the windows, I made a decision that would change everything. I decided to trust Dominic Ricci, despite all the warning signs, despite not knowing exactly what his family business entailed, despite the rational voice in my head telling me I was making a terrible mistake. "Okay," I said again, more firmly this time. But I have conditions. Nothing illegal happens around Chloe, ever. She doesn't need to know about any of this. As far as she's concerned, you're just Marco's uncle who's become our friend. And if at any point I feel like she's in danger because of your involvement in our lives, this ends immediately. Agreed, Dominic said without hesitation. You have my word, and that means something in my world. We talked for a few more minutes about practical matters, exchanged phone numbers, and then Dominic stood to leave. At the door, he paused and turned back to me. Jessica, one more thing. There's a spring festival at the park this Saturday. I'm taking Marco. Would you and Chloe like to join us? Just as friends. No pressure. I thought about Chloe, who had so few opportunities to do normal family activities. I thought about myself, isolated and lonely, always too focused on surviving to actually live. And I thought about the genuine kindness I'd seen in Dominic's eyes when he talked to my daughter. Okay, I said for the third time that morning, and this time I smiled. Chloe would love that, and so would I. The smile he gave me in return was worth every risk I was taking. After he left, I sat alone in my classroom, my coffee growing cold, and wondered what I'd just gotten myself into. But for the first time in 2 years, I felt something other than fear and exhaustion. I felt hope. Saturday arrived with perfect weather, clear skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of spring flowers. I'd told Chloe we were meeting Mr. Ricci and Marco at the festival, and she'd been bouncing with excitement all morning. She'd changed her outfit 3 times before settling on her favorite yellow sundress with white flowers, the one that made her look like a ray of sunshine. I'd agonized over my own outfit, eventually choosing dark jeans and a soft pink blouse, casual but presentable. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I wondered when I'd stop dressing for myself and started dressing to survive. Brian had always criticized my appearance, told me I was too plain, too ordinary. I'd believed him for so long that I'd forgotten how to feel pretty. Dominic was waiting at the park entrance with Marco when we arrived. He wore dark jeans and a black t-shirt that showed off his athletic build, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him before. Marco was clutching a balloon already, his face lit up with excitement. When he saw us, he waved enthusiastically. "Miss Parker, Chloe," he called out, and Chloe ran ahead to join him, the 2 children immediately chattering about which rides they wanted to try first. "They seem to get along well," Dominic observed, falling into step beside me as we followed the children into the festival. "Chloe's made a friend," I said, smiling at the sight of my daughter's happiness. "That's worth everything to me." The festival was exactly what a spring celebration should be. Colorful booths selling handmade crafts, food vendors offering everything from cotton candy to gyros, a small carnival area with rides appropriate for young children, and a stage where local musicians performed. We let the children choose the activities, following their lead as they raced from one attraction to another. Dominic insisted on paying for everything, waving away my protests. "Please," he said simply, "let me do this." I watched him with the children, and my heart did something complicated in my chest. He was patient and attentive, lifting Chloe onto the carousel horse next to Marco, making sure they were secure before the ride started. He won them both stuffed animals at the ring toss, even though I suspected he'd paid the vendor extra to ensure their success. He bought them ice cream and didn't complain when Marco got chocolate all over his expensive-looking watch. This was what a father should be, I thought. Present, engaged, caring about the small moments that children remember forever. We were sitting on a bench, watching the children play in a supervised bounce house, when Dominic's phone rang. His expression changed immediately when he looked at the screen, becoming harder, more guarded. "I need to take this," he said, standing up. "I'll just be a moment." He walked a few feet away, and though I couldn't hear the conversation, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the sharp gestures he made as he talked. This was the other Dominic, the one involved in the family business he'd alluded to. It was a reminder that the gentle man who bought my daughter ice cream was also someone who operated in a world I didn't understand. He returned 5 minutes later, his expression neutral, but his eyes troubled. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just business," he said, sitting back down beside me. "Nothing for you to worry about." But I did worry, because in that moment, I saw clearly the duality of the man I was letting into my life. And I wondered if I was being foolish, putting my daughter in proximity to someone who might bring danger to our doorstep. As if sensing my thoughts, Dominic turned to me. "Jessica, I know what you're thinking. And I promise you, my business life and my personal life are kept completely separate. What I do to earn money has nothing to do with how I feel about you and Chloe." "How you feel about us?" I repeated, my heart suddenly racing. He held my gaze. "Yes. I think you know by now that this isn't just about helping Marco's teacher. I care about you. I care about Chloe. And I want to be part of your lives, if you'll let me." I was saved from having to respond by Chloe's excited voice calling out, "Mommy, can we get face painting?" "Of course, sweetie," I called back, grateful for the interruption. Dominic and I stood up together, and I was acutely aware of his presence beside me as we walked toward the face painting booth. The artist painted a butterfly on Chloe's cheek and a tiger on Marco's. They admired each other's designs in the mirror, giggling and making exaggerated faces. It was such a normal, sweet moment that I let myself relax and just enjoy the day. That's when I saw him. Brian was standing near the funnel cake stand, about 30 feet away, staring directly at us. My blood ran cold. He looked terrible, unshaven and rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. And he was watching Chloe with an expression that sent panic racing through my veins. My hand instinctively reached out and grabbed Dominic's arm. He immediately sensed something was wrong and followed my gaze. When he saw Brian, his entire demeanor changed. His body went rigid, his jaw clenched, and he stepped slightly in front of me, positioning himself between Brian and the children. "That's him?" he asked quietly, his voice deadly calm. "Yes," I whispered, my voice shaking. "We need to get the children out of here." But before we could move, Brian started walking toward us. I felt my fight-or-flight response kick in, every instinct screaming at me to grab Chloe and run. Dominic's hand found mine and squeezed gently, a silent message of reassurance. Brian stopped a few feet away, swaying slightly. He was drunk, I realized with a sinking feeling. At 2 p.m, at a children's festival, he was drunk. "Jessica," he slurred, his eyes moving from me to Dominic with confusion and then anger. "Who the hell is this?" "Brian, you need to leave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This isn't the time or place." "The time or place," he repeated, his voice rising. "To see my own daughter? You've been keeping her from me, and now I find you here with some other man, playing happy family?" Chloe had noticed the commotion and was walking toward us, Marco following behind her. The confusion and fear on her face broke my heart. "Daddy?" she said tentatively, and I could hear the hope mixed with uncertainty in her voice. Before Brian could respond, Dominic moved. He didn't touch Brian, didn't threaten him physically, but he positioned himself so that he was between Brian and Chloe. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried an unmistakable edge of authority and warning. "Mr. Parker, my name is Dominic Ricci. I'm a friend of Jessica's, and I think it would be best if you left now. You're intoxicated, and you're scaring your daughter." Brian's face turned red with rage. "You don't get to tell me what to do with my daughter. Who the hell do you think you are?" "Someone who actually showed up," Dominic replied calmly. "Someone who's been here all day, making sure Chloe has fun and feels safe." something you haven't done in 2 years. The crowd around us had gone quiet, people stopping to watch the confrontation. I felt humiliation wash over me, but also a fierce gratitude for Dominic's presence. Without him here, I would have been facing Brian alone, trying to protect Chloe while people stared and judged. Brian took a step forward, and I saw Dominic's muscles tense, ready to respond if needed. But then something changed in Brian's expression. He was looking at Dominic more carefully now, and I saw recognition dawn in his eyes, followed by fear. "Ricci," he said slowly. "You're one of those Riccis, the family that runs—" He stopped himself, but the damage was done. "Yes," Dominic said simply. "I am. And now you understand why it would be very unwise for you to cause any problems here today. Jessica has been patient with you, but that patience has limits. If you want to see your daughter, you'll do it the right way, through the courts, sober, and prepared to actually be a father. But right now, you're going to turn around and leave this festival, and you're going to stay away from Jessica and Chloe until you've gotten yourself together." The threat was unspoken, but crystal clear. Brian's face had gone pale, and he was backing away now, his earlier bravado completely deflated. "This isn't over," he said, but his voice was weak. "Chloe is my daughter." "Then prove it," Dominic replied. "Be the father she deserves, but not today. Not like this." Brian turned and stumbled away, disappearing into the crowd. I stood frozen, my heart hammering, my hands shaking. Dominic immediately turned to Chloe, kneeling down to her level. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" he asked gently. Chloe looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "Mommy, why was Daddy being mean?" I knelt down beside her, pulling her into my arms. "Daddy's not feeling well, honey. He didn't mean to scare you." But Dominic didn't let me make excuses. He waited until Chloe looked at him, then spoke with quiet honesty. "Chloe, sometimes adults make mistakes and need time to fix themselves. Your daddy needs to do that right now. But you know what? While he's working on being better, you have people who love you and want to take care of you. Your mommy, who's the strongest person I've ever met. And if you'll let me, I'd like to be your friend too. Is that okay?" Chloe sniffled, then nodded slowly. "You're nice. You don't yell like Daddy did." "I promise I'll never yell at you or your mommy," Dominic said seriously. "That's not how friends treat each other." Marco had been standing quietly nearby, and now he came over and took Chloe's hand. "Come on, Chloe. Let's go see if we can win more stuffed animals. I'll help you." The children walked away together, and I stood up on shaky legs. The full impact of what had just happened was hitting me now. Dominic rose to his feet and gently guided me to a nearby bench, away from the curious stares of the other festival goers. "I'm sorry," I said, and I was horrified to feel tears starting to fall. "I'm so sorry you had to deal with that. I'm sorry Chloe had to see it. I'm sorry." "Stop," Dominic said firmly but kindly. He sat beside me and, after a moment's hesitation, put his arm around my shoulders. "You have nothing to apologize for. Brian's behavior is not your responsibility. But bringing Chloe here, letting her be exposed to this— You brought your daughter to a festival to have fun. You're doing nothing wrong. Brian is the one who showed up drunk and created a scene." His arm tightened around me slightly. "And I'm glad I was here. Let your ex see what family looks like." Those words, spoken so softly near my ear, made something inside me break open. I turned my face into Dominic's shoulder and let myself cry, really cry for the first time since my divorce. All the fear, the exhaustion, the loneliness I'd been carrying alone poured out of me while this man I barely knew held me and let me fall apart. When I finally pulled away, embarrassed and wiping at my eyes, Dominic handed me a clean handkerchief. An actual cloth handkerchief, like something from a different era. "I'm a mess," I said, trying to laugh. Some tough single mom I am. You're the toughest person here, Dominic replied seriously. Do you know how much strength it takes to do what you've been doing? Raising a child alone, teaching all day, dealing with threats from your ex, and still showing up with a smile and making sure Chloe feels loved and safe. That's not weakness, Jessica. That's heroism. I looked at him through my tears, and something shifted between us in that moment. This wasn't just attraction anymore, or gratitude for his help. This was something deeper, more dangerous, more real. I was falling for this man, this complicated, protective, mysterious man who had appeared in my life like a guardian angel with a dark past. Take us home? I asked quietly. I think we've had enough excitement for one day. Of course, he said immediately. Let me get the kids. As we walked to his car, a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than I made in 2 years, with Chloe holding my hand and Marco chattering excitedly about the day's adventures, I felt like I was standing at a crossroads. Behind me was the life I'd known, safe, contained, exhausting but predictable. Ahead of me was something entirely unknown, potentially dangerous, but filled with the promise of protection, support, and maybe even love. Dominic loaded the children into the back seat, making sure their seatbelts were secure, then opened the passenger door for me. As I slid into the leather seat, I caught his eye and saw the question there. He was asking permission to keep going, to keep being part of our lives, to keep offering the kind of support and protection I'd never had before. I smiled at him, a real smile despite the tears still drying on my cheeks. And that was my answer. I was choosing the unknown. I was choosing him. And whatever came next, we would face it together. Over the next 3 weeks, Dominic became a constant presence in our lives. He showed up at school events, always sitting in the back but making sure Chloe saw him there. He took us to dinner at family-friendly restaurants, never pushing for anything more intimate than shared meals and conversation. He helped Chloe with a science project about butterflies, spending an entire Saturday afternoon helping her build a small garden box for her classroom. He was patient, kind, and exactly what I'd always wished for in a partner. But I wasn't naive. I knew there was another side to Dominic's life, one he carefully kept separate from the time he spent with us. Sometimes his phone would ring late at night. I knew because he'd call to say goodnight to Chloe, and I'd hear the interruption. Sometimes he'd cancel plans at the last minute with vague mentions of business emergencies. And sometimes, when I looked into his eyes, I saw shadows there, darkness from whatever he did when he wasn't being the perfect gentleman with me and my daughter. I told myself it didn't matter, that what he did for a living was his business, as long as it didn't touch Chloe's life. I'd built a wall in my mind, separating the Dominic I knew from the Dominic who ran whatever operations the Ricci family was involved in. It was easier that way, safer for my heart and my conscience. That wall came crashing down on a Tuesday morning in late April. I arrived at school early, as usual, to prepare for the day. But as soon as I walked through the main entrance, I knew something was wrong. There were police cars in the parking lot, and Mrs. Henderson was standing in the lobby with 2 detectives, her face pale and worried. "Jessica," she said when she saw me, relief flooding her features. "Thank goodness. These detectives need to speak with you." My heart started racing. Had something happened to Chloe? But no, she was with my mother this morning. I'd dropped her there early because I had a staff meeting. "What's this about?" The older detective, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and iron gray hair, stepped forward. "Miss Parker, I'm Detective Sarah Morrison, and this is my partner, Detective James Chen. We need to ask you some questions about Dominic Ricci." The bottom dropped out of my stomach. I must have gone pale because Mrs. Henderson immediately guided me to a chair in the administrative office. The detectives followed, and once the door was closed, Detective Morrison sat across from me while her partner leaned against the wall, his pen poised over a notepad. "How long have you known Mr. Ricci?" Detective Morrison asked gently. "About a month," I answered, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "He's the guardian of one of our students, Marco Benedetti. Why? What's happened?" The detectives exchanged glances. "We're investigating the Ricci family's business operations," Detective Chen said. "We have reason to believe they're involved in illegal activities, including money laundering, extortion, and possibly worse. We've learned that Mr. Ricci has been spending significant time with you and your daughter. We're concerned for your safety." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I'd known, on some level, that Dominic's family was involved in questionable activities. But hearing it stated so bluntly, in official police terms, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "He's never done anything to put us in danger," I said, hearing the defensiveness in my voice. "He's been nothing but kind to me and my daughter." "That's how men like Dominic Ricci operate," Detective Morrison said, not unkindly. "They're charming, protective, they make you feel safe. But Miss Parker, the reality is that association with him puts you at risk. Rival organizations, federal investigations, the violence that's inherent to his world. All of that could touch your life and your daughter's life." I thought about Chloe, about her laughing as Dominic pushed her on the swings at the park last weekend. I thought about how she'd started calling him Dom and asking when we'd see him next. I thought about how, for the first time since my divorce, I'd felt like I had a partner, someone who shared the burden of keeping my daughter safe and happy. "What do you want from me?" I asked quietly. "Information," Detective Chen replied. "Anything he's told you about his business, places he goes, people he meets with. And we'd like your cooperation in gathering more information." I stared at them in disbelief. "You want me to spy on him? To betray his trust?" "We want you to help us stop a criminal organization that ruins lives," Detective Morrison said firmly. "Miss Parker, I've seen what happens to innocent people who get caught up with families like the Riccis. Sometimes they become complicit in the crimes, sometimes they become victims, and sometimes they become collateral damage. Is that what you want for your daughter?" The mention of Chloe was a direct hit, and the detective knew it. I felt tears pricking at my eyes. "I need time to think." "We understand this is difficult," Detective Morrison said, her voice softening slightly. She handed me a business card. "But time is a luxury we may not have. If you care about your daughter's safety, you'll consider what we've said very carefully. And in the meantime, I strongly suggest you distance yourself from Mr. Ricci." After they left, I sat in that office for 15 minutes, unable to move. Mrs. Henderson brought me water and told me to take whatever time I needed, but I could see the concern and questions in her eyes. The whole school would know about the police visit by lunchtime. I'd become the subject of gossip, the teacher who was dating a criminal. I went through the motions of teaching that day, but my mind was elsewhere. When the final bell rang, and I walked down the hallway to collect Chloe from after-school care, I saw Dominic's car in the parking lot. He was leaning against it, looking at his phone, and when he saw me and Chloe, he smiled that warm smile that had become so familiar. Chloe ran to him, as she always did now, and he scooped her up, making her giggle. The sight of them together, so natural and easy, made my heart ache. How could I reconcile the man I'd come to care for with what the detectives had said? "Hey," Dominic said when I reached them, his smile fading as he studied my face. "What's wrong?" "We need to talk," I said quietly, glancing at Chloe. "Alone." Understanding flickered in his eyes, along with something that looked like resignation. "Okay, let me take you both home, and then we'll talk." The drive to my apartment was quiet, Chloe chattering in the back seat about her day, while Dominic and I maintained a tense silence in the front. When we arrived, I asked my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, if she could watch Chloe for a bit. The older woman agreed readily. She loved Chloe and often babysat for me. Once Chloe was safely next door, I invited Dominic inside. He stood in my small living room, looking larger than life among my modest furniture, and waited for me to speak. "The police came to school today," I said, without preamble. "Detectives. They're investigating your family. They told me about the money laundering, the extortion. They said being around you puts me and Chloe in danger." Dominic's expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten. "And what do you think?" "I think you've been lying to me by omission," I said, anger flooding through me now. "You told me your business existed in gray areas. You made it sound like maybe you cut some corners, maybe bent some rules. You didn't tell me you're involved in serious organized crime." "Would you have given me a chance if I had?" he asked quietly. "No," I shouted, then lowered my voice, aware that my walls were thin. "No, I wouldn't have. Because I'm a mother, Dominic. My first responsibility is keeping my daughter safe, and you've made me compromise that." He stepped closer, and I instinctively stepped back. Hurt flashed across his face, but he stopped moving. "I have never, and would never do anything to hurt you or Chloe. Everything I've done has been to protect you both." "Protect us from what?" I demanded. "From Brian? You did that by making veiled threats using your reputation as a criminal. Do you know how that makes me feel? I relied on fear tactics from a mobster to keep my ex-husband away from my daughter." "He was threatening you," Dominic said, his voice rising now too. "He was drunk, potentially violent. I did what I had to do to keep you both safe. By revealing who you really are." I was crying now, hot tears of anger and betrayal streaming down my face. "The detectives want me to inform on you, to help them gather evidence. They gave me their card and told me that staying close to you makes Chloe a target." Dominic went very still. "And what did you tell them?" "I told them I needed time to think," I said, wiping at my tears furiously. "But I know what I have to do, Dominic. I have to think of Chloe first, always." "And you think I don't?" he asked, and now I could hear pain in his voice. "Jessica, I've been falling in love with you, with both of you. I know my world is dark. I know what I do isn't right by most people's standards. But with you and Chloe, I've had a glimpse of something different. Something good and pure that I never thought I could have." His words hit me like a physical blow. "Don't," I whispered. "Don't say that now." "Why not?" "It's the truth." He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd never seen from him before. "I'm not going to apologize for who I am or what I do. My family's business is what it is, and I have responsibilities I can't walk away from. But I swear to you, on everything I hold sacred, that I will never let that world touch you or Chloe. You are separate, protected." "But that's not possible," I said, feeling defeated. "The detectives made that very clear. Just knowing you, just being seen with you, puts us at risk. There are rival families, federal investigations, violence that could spill over into our lives. How can I take that risk with my daughter?" Dominic was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy. "Then what do you want me to do? Walk away? Pretend the last month never happened?" I thought about Chloe's face when she talked about Dom, about how secure and happy she'd been lately. I thought about my own feelings, the way my heart raced when I saw Dominic, the way his presence had filled a void I'd been living with for so long. I thought about the future I'd started to imagine, one where I wasn't alone anymore, where Chloe had a father figure who actually loved her. But then I thought about everything I'd worked for, the safe, stable life I'd built for us. I thought about the risks the detectives had outlined, the very real dangers that came with loving someone like Dominic. I thought about what kind of mother I would be if I chose my own happiness over my daughter's safety. "Yes," I said, and the word felt like it was ripping my heart out. "I think you need to walk away, for all of our sakes." Dominic looked at me for a long moment, and I saw such raw pain in his eyes that I almost took the words back. But then his expression closed off, becoming the neutral mask I'd seen that day in the gymnasium when we first met. "If that's what you want," he said stiffly, "I'll respect your wishes. I'll make sure Marco is picked up by someone else from now on. You won't have to see me at school anymore." "Dominic," I started, not sure what I wanted to say. "No, it's fine," he interrupted, moving toward the door. "You're right. You have to put Chloe first. I understand that. It's one of the things I love about you." He paused at the door, his hand on the knob, and looked back at me one last time. "Just know this, Jessica. Regardless of what you decide to do with those detectives, regardless of whether you choose to help them or not, I would never hurt you or Chloe. That protection I offered, it stands, whether I'm in your life or not. If Brian comes around again, if anyone threatens you, you call me. Promise me that." I couldn't speak past the lump in my throat, so I just nodded. Dominic smiled sadly, then walked out of my apartment and, I thought, out of my life. I stood there listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway, and then I collapsed on my couch and sobbed. The following week was the hardest of my life. Chloe kept asking when we'd see Dom again, and each time I had to tell her he was busy with work, I saw the light dim a little more in her eyes. She'd gotten attached so quickly, and now I was watching her heart break in small, daily increments. It made me hate myself for allowing it to happen, for being so careless with my daughter's feelings. At school, Emma kept giving me concerned looks but didn't push when I said I didn't want to talk about it. Mrs. Henderson called me into her office one afternoon and gently asked if everything was all right, mentioning that the police visit had raised some concerns. I assured her my personal life wouldn't affect my teaching, and she seemed satisfied with that, though I could tell she had questions she was too polite to ask. Marco was picked up now by an older woman, who Dominic's mother, I assumed. The boy seemed confused by the change in routine and asked me several times where his uncle was. I didn't have good answers for him either. Brian hadn't contacted me since the festival incident, which should have been a relief, but somehow made me more anxious. I kept expecting him to show up again, more angry and dangerous than before, and without Dominic's protection, I felt exposed and vulnerable. Detective Morrison called me twice, leaving voicemails asking if I'd made a decision about cooperating with their investigation. I deleted both messages without returning them. I couldn't betray Dominic, despite everything. The thought of wearing a wire or trying to gather evidence against him made me physically ill. But I also couldn't ignore what the detectives had told me. I spent hours researching the Ricci family online, finding news articles about investigations and allegations, always careful to note that nothing had been proven in court. The family was careful, well-connected, and skilled at operating in the shadows. Dominic's name appeared occasionally, always as a person of interest, but never as someone actually charged with a crime. 10 days after our breakup, everything changed. It was a Thursday evening, and I was making dinner while Chloe did homework at the kitchen table. There was a knock at my door, and I assumed it was Mrs. Chen returning a casserole dish she'd borrowed. But when I looked through the peephole, my blood ran cold. Brian stood in the hallway, and he wasn't alone. A woman I didn't recognize stood beside him, professionally dressed in a suit, carrying a briefcase. Brian looked sober for once, his hair combed, wearing clean clothes. That scared me more than his previous drunken appearance had. I opened the door but kept the chain lock engaged. "What do you want, Brian?" "We need to talk, Jess," he said, and his voice was steady, almost reasonable. "This is my attorney, Margaret Richardson. I've filed for joint custody of Chloe. We're here to discuss the terms. My heart started pounding. You can't be serious. You've barely seen her in 2 years. You showed up drunk to a children's festival. No court will give you custody. The attorney stepped forward. Miss Parker, my client has completed a 30-day rehabilitation program. He's been sober for over 2 weeks now and is committed to being an active father in his daughter's life. We're not trying to take Chloe away from you entirely, but Mr. Parker has rights, and he's exercised those rights through the proper legal channels. I need to see the papers, I said, my mind racing. I need to get my own lawyer. Of course, Margaret said smoothly, pulling documents from her briefcase and passing them through the narrow opening I'd created. But Miss Parker, there's something else you should know. We're aware of your relationship with Dominic Ricci, and we believe that exposing a minor child to a known criminal associate constitutes a significant concern regarding your judgment as a parent. I felt like I'd been slapped. I'm not in a relationship with anyone, and Dominic has never been charged with any crime. But he's been investigated multiple times, Brian said, and there was a triumphant gleam in his eyes that made me want to slam the door in his face. And you let him around our daughter. What were you thinking, Jess? Getting involved with a mobster? Get out, I said, my voice shaking. Both of you. My lawyer will be in touch. I closed the door and leaned against it, the legal papers clutched in my hand. From the kitchen, I heard Chloe call out, Mommy? Who was that? Nobody, sweetie, I called back, forcing my voice to sound normal. Just someone with the wrong apartment. But as I looked down at the custody filing in my hands, I knew everything had just gotten infinitely more complicated. Brian was using my association with Dominic against me, and I had no idea how to fight back. That night, after putting Chloe to bed, I did something I'd been avoiding. I pulled out Detective Morrison's card and stared at it for a long time. If I helped the police, if I testified about Dominic's activities, it might help my custody case. It would prove I'd severed ties with him, that I was cooperating with law enforcement. It might be the difference between keeping my daughter and losing her to Brian. But the thought of betraying Dominic made me sick. Despite everything, despite the way we'd ended things, I still cared about him. More than cared. I was in love with him, had been for weeks, even though I'd been too scared to admit it. The thought of wearing a wire, of recording his conversations, of potentially sending him to prison, I couldn't do it. I was trapped between two impossible choices: betray the man I loved to keep my daughter, or stay silent and risk losing her anyway. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios in my mind. By the time morning came, I'd made a decision. I was going to call Dominic. I needed his help, but more than that, I needed to see him, to tell him the truth about how I felt, before it was too late. I waited until Chloe was at school and my morning classes were done. During my lunch break, I stood in my empty classroom and dialed his number with shaking hands. He answered on the second ring. Jessica. His voice was cautious, concerned. Is everything okay? Is Chloe all right? We're fine, I said quickly. But I need to see you. Can you meet me after school? It's important. There was a pause. Of course. Where? The coffee shop near the school. The one where you got me that latte the first time we talked? I'll be there at 4, he promised. Jessica, whatever's wrong, we'll figure it out. The afternoon crawled by. I taught my lessons on autopilot, my mind already jumping ahead to the conversation I needed to have. When the final bell rang, I practically ran to my car, drove the 2 blocks to the coffee shop, and arrived 15 minutes early. Dominic was already there, sitting at a corner table. He stood when he saw me come in, and I was struck by how tired he looked. There were shadows under his eyes, and his expression was guarded, like he was bracing himself for bad news. I got a coffee I didn't want, and joined him at the table. For a moment, we just looked at each other, and I saw my own pain reflected in his eyes. "Brian filed for joint custody," I said without preamble. "He's completed a rehab program and hired a lawyer, and they're using my relationship with you as evidence that I have poor judgment." Dominic's expression darkened. "That son of a—" He stopped himself, visibly controlling his anger. "When did this happen?" "Last night. He showed up at my apartment with his attorney." I pulled the legal papers from my bag and slid them across the table. "I don't know what to do, Dominic. If I fight this, they'll dig into everything. They'll find out about you, about your family. The police might even use it against you in their investigation." He barely glanced at the papers, his eyes fixed on my face. "What did the detectives say when you told them about this?" I looked down at my untouched coffee. "I haven't talked to them. I couldn't do it, Dominic. They want me to inform on you, to help them build a case. But I can't betray you like that. Jessica." His voice was soft, and when I looked up, I saw something fierce and tender in his expression. "You need to do what's best for Chloe. If cooperating with the police helps you keep your daughter, then that's what you should do." "How can you say that?" I asked, tears starting to fall despite my efforts to hold them back. "If I testify against you, you could go to prison." "Then I go to prison," he said simply. "I knew the risks when I chose this life. But you and Chloe, you didn't choose any of this. I brought it into your world, and now you're paying the price. I won't let you lose your daughter because of me." I shook my head, crying openly now. "I don't want to lose you either. I've been miserable this past week. Chloe cries at night asking for you. I can't eat, can't sleep. I love you, Dominic. I love you, and I'm terrified of what that means. But I can't deny it anymore." He reached across the table and took my hand, his grip strong and warm. "I love you too. God, Jessica, you have no idea how much. This last week without you has been torture. But loving you means putting you and Chloe first, even if that means stepping away." "No," I said fiercely. "I'm done running from this. I'm done pretending I can go back to my safe, lonely life. You asked me at the festival to let Brian see what family looks like. Well, this is family. It's messy and complicated and scary, but it's real. And I want it. I want you." Dominic stood up and pulled me to my feet, wrapping his arms around me right there in the middle of the coffee shop. I buried my face in his chest and held on tight, feeling like I was finally coming home after being lost for so long. "Then we fight," he said against my hair. "We fight for you to keep Chloe, and we fight for us. I'll hire the best family law attorney in Chicago. We'll counter Brian's claims, and we'll win this case. I promise you." I pulled back enough to look up at him. "But the police investigation—" "Let me worry about that," he said. "I've been dealing with law enforcement my entire adult life. They have suspicions but no proof, otherwise I'd already be in prison. And I'm going to start making changes, Jessica. Legitimate changes. I've already been transitioning some of the family business to legal operations. It'll take time, but I can do it. For you, for Chloe, for the life I want to build with you both." Hope bloomed in my chest, fragile but real. "You'd really do that? Leave the criminal side of things behind?" "I'm already doing it," he assured me. "It's not something that happens overnight, but I've been moving in that direction since the day I met you. You made me want to be better, to be someone worthy of you and Chloe." We stood there, holding each other, and I felt the broken pieces of my heart starting to mend. Around us, the coffee shop continued its normal afternoon routine, people typing on laptops and having conversations, completely unaware that my entire world had just shifted back into alignment. "Come home with me," I said quietly. "Come see Chloe. She's missed you so much." Dominic smiled, that genuine, warm smile that had first captured my heart. There's nothing I'd like more. The custody battle with Brian lasted 4 brutal months. His attorney tried every tactic imaginable to paint me as an unfit mother, from my association with Dominic to questioning my long work hours as a teacher. But Dominic kept his promise. He hired Catherine Walsh, the most formidable family law attorney in Chicago, a woman who'd built her reputation on winning impossible cases. Catherine was brilliant. She obtained Brian's employment records showing he'd been fired from multiple jobs due to attendance issues. She subpoenaed his medical records, revealing he'd left the rehab facility against medical advice and had tested positive for alcohol just 2 weeks later. She interviewed neighbors from his apartment building who testified about loud, drunken arguments with his girlfriend. But more than that, Catherine built our case around the positive. She brought in testimonies from my colleagues about my dedication as a teacher and mother. She had Chloe's pediatrician testify about the excellent care I provided. And yes, she addressed my relationship with Dominic head-on. My client is in a relationship with a successful businessman, Catherine stated firmly during a hearing. Dominic Ricci has never been charged with any crime. He's a devoted guardian to his nephew and has shown nothing but kindness and support to Miss Parker and her daughter. The fact that there have been investigations into his family's business dealings does not make him a criminal, and it certainly doesn't make Miss Parker an unfit mother for associating with him. The real turning point came when Brian showed up drunk to a supervised visitation with Chloe. The social worker documented everything: his slurred speech, the smell of alcohol on his breath, the way Chloe had been frightened and asked to leave. After that incident, even Brian's own attorney looked defeated. The judge's ruling came on a hot day in August. Full custody to me, with Brian granted supervised visitation only after completing a certified 90-day rehab program and maintaining 6 months of documented sobriety. It was more than I'd hoped for, and when the judge banged her gavel, I felt years of fear and tension drain out of me. Dominic was waiting outside the courthouse with Chloe, who'd spent the day with him and his mother. When Chloe saw my face, she knew immediately that we'd won. She ran to me, and I scooped her up, holding her tight while tears of relief streamed down my face. "We did it, baby girl," I whispered. "You're staying with me." "And with Dom?" she asked hopefully, and I laughed through my tears. "Yes, sweetheart, with Dom too." That evening, Dominic took us to dinner at an elegant Italian restaurant his family owned in Little Italy. His mother was there, a formidable woman named Rosa, who'd been surprisingly warm when Dominic first introduced us months ago. Marco was there too, delighted to have his uncle and his favorite teacher at the same table. It felt like a celebration, but also like the beginning of something new. After dinner, while Marco and Chloe played in the restaurant's small courtyard garden under Rosa's watchful eye, Dominic and I stood at the railing overlooking the city lights. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his arm around my waist. "About making changes, going legitimate. I've been working with some business consultants, restructuring the family operations. It's going to take another year, maybe 2, but I can get us completely legal. Dominic, I don't want you to give up everything you know just for me," I said, even though the thought of him leaving the criminal world behind filled me with relief. "It's not just for you," he replied, pulling me closer. "It's for me too. I'm tired, Jessica. Tired of looking over my shoulder. Tired of living in a world where trust is a weakness and loyalty is bought with fear. When I'm with you and Chloe, I feel like I can breathe for the first time in my life. That's worth more than any amount of money or power." I turned to face him, reaching up to touch his face. "I love you." I should have said it more clearly before, without all the fear and hesitation. "I love you, Dominic Ricci, all of you, including the parts that scare me." He kissed me then, soft and sweet, full of promise. When we pulled apart, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My heart started racing. "I know it's fast," he said, opening the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring. "And I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. But Jessica Parker, When you're ready, whenever that is, I want to be your husband. I want to adopt Chloe and be her father in every way that matters. I want to build a life with you both that's honest and real and full of all the love we deserve." I looked at the ring, then at Dominic's face, seeing the vulnerability and hope there. In the background, I could hear Chloe's delighted laughter as Rosa showed her how to make a wish on a dandelion. This was the family I'd dreamed of during my darkest days with Brian, the one I'd thought I'd never have. "Yes," I said, and watched joy transform Dominic's face. "Not tomorrow, and maybe not even next year. But yes, eventually, when we're both ready. I want all of that too." He slipped the ring on my finger, and it fit perfectly, catching the streetlight and throwing sparkles across my hand. We kissed again, deeper this time, sealing the promise we were making to each other. The next months passed in a blur of happiness, punctuated by continued hard work. Dominic was true to his word, gradually transitioning the Ricci family business into legitimate enterprises. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when his connections to the old world created tension. But he never wavered in his commitment to building a different life. Detective Morrison called me one more time, asking if I'd reconsidered cooperating with their investigation. I told her honestly that I had nothing to offer them, that my relationship with Dominic was personal, not professional, and that I believed in his transformation. She wasn't happy, but she accepted my answer. The investigation into the Ricci family eventually went cold due to lack of evidence, just as Dominic had predicted. At school, the gossip about my relationship with Dominic eventually faded, replaced by newer, more interesting scandals. Mrs. Henderson remained supportive, especially after seeing how Chloe thrived with Dominic's presence in her life. Emma became one of my closest friends, always ready with advice and someone to watch Chloe when Dominic and I needed time alone. Chloe blossomed. With the custody battle resolved and a stable, loving family finally in place, she became more confident, more joyful. She started calling Dominic Dad about 6 months after the court ruling, and the first time she did it, I watched him tear up with emotion. He was everything a father should be, present at her school events, helping with homework, teaching her to ride a bike, reading bedtime stories in different funny voices that made her giggle. A year after that day outside the courthouse, we had a quiet wedding in Rosa's backyard, with only close family and friends present. Chloe was my maid of honor, wearing a dress the same shade of pink as mine. Marco was Dominic's best man, standing proud beside his uncle. It was small and intimate and perfect. During our vows, Dominic spoke not just to me, but to Chloe too. "I promise to be the father you deserve," he said, looking at my daughter with such love that I felt my heart might burst. "To protect you, guide you, and love you unconditionally for the rest of my life. You and your mother are my family now, and family is everything." After the ceremony, as we cut the cake and Chloe fed both of us bites with her little hands, I thought about how far we'd come. 1.5 years ago, I'd been a single mother barely surviving, protecting my daughter from an abusive ex-husband, terrified and alone. Now I stood surrounded by people who loved us, married to a man who'd transformed his entire life to be worthy of our love. Brian made one last attempt to re-enter Chloe's life about 6 months after our wedding. He'd completed a rehab program and wanted to resume supervised visits. We agreed, because despite everything, I believed children deserved the chance to know their biological parents if it could be done safely. But Chloe, now 8 years old and mature beyond her years, made her feelings clear after the first visit. "He's nice enough," she told me that evening. "But he's not my dad. Dom is my dad. Brian is just Brian." We continued the supervised visits for a few months, but Brian's interest waned when he realized Chloe wouldn't be swayed from the family she'd chosen. Eventually, the visits stopped altogether, and though it made me sad for what might have been, I accepted it. Chloe had the father she needed, and that's what mattered. 2 years after our wedding, Dominic completed the final transition of the family business. The Ricci name was now associated with legitimate real estate development, several successful restaurants, and a chain of auto repair shops. There were no more late-night phone calls that made his expression go hard and distant. No more mysterious business emergencies that took him away. He'd kept his promise, and in doing so, had become the man I always knew he could be. On a Sunday morning in late spring, I woke to find Dominic and Chloe in the kitchen making breakfast. They were laughing about something, flour somehow ending up on both their noses. The scene was so perfectly domestic, so wonderfully normal, that I stood in the doorway just watching them for a moment. Dominic looked up and saw me, his face lighting up with that smile I'd fallen in love with. "Good morning, beautiful. We're making pancakes, though they might be a little creative." Chloe turned around, grinning. "Mom, Dad let me add chocolate chips and blueberries. He says they're going to be the best pancakes ever." I walked into the kitchen and kissed them both, tasting the sweetness of the life we'd built together. "I'm sure they will be, sweetheart." As we sat down to eat our slightly lopsided, overly enthusiastic pancakes, I thought about that day in the gymnasium when I first saw Dominic Ricci. I'd been so afraid, so guarded, so convinced that letting anyone into our lives would only bring pain and danger. But sometimes the most unexpected people become family. Sometimes the person who seems the most dangerous turns out to be the safest haven. Sometimes love finds you in the most impossible circumstances and transforms everything. Dominic caught my eye across the table and gave me that soft, private smile that was just for me. In that smile was every promise he'd kept, every sacrifice he'd made, every way he'd proven himself worthy of our trust and love. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly, while Chloe chattered about her plans for the day. "Just how lucky we are," I replied honestly. "How lucky Chloe is to have you as her father. How lucky I am to have you as my husband." "I'm the lucky one," he said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "You and Chloe gave me something I never thought I'd have. A real family, built on love instead of fear. You saved me, Jessica." "We saved each other," I corrected him, and it was the truth. That afternoon, we went to the park where Dominic had first held Chloe at the spring festival, where he'd made that promise to Brian. Let your ex see what family looks like. Now, 2 years later, we returned to that same place not as new acquaintances navigating dangerous waters, but as a family in every sense of the word. Dominic pushed Chloe on the swings while I watched from a nearby bench, my hand resting on my slightly rounded belly where our second child grew. We hadn't told Chloe yet about her baby sibling. That announcement would come next week. But sitting there in the spring sunshine, watching the two people I loved most in the world laughing together, I felt a peace I'd never known before. The path to this moment hadn't been easy. It had required courage, trust, and the willingness to risk everything for love. There had been moments when I'd doubted my choices, moments when fear almost won. But standing on the other side of those struggles, I could see that every difficult decision, every terrifying step forward, had led us here, to this family, to this love, to this life. Dominic looked over at me and mouthed, "I love you." And I smiled back, my heart full to overflowing. In a world that had seemed so dark and dangerous, we'd found light. In the midst of chaos and fear, we'd built something beautiful and lasting. And that, I realized, was what family truly looked like. Not perfect, but real. Not easy, but worth fighting for. Not found where you expect it, but exactly where you need it to be.